Welcome to Search the Scriptures. Today we are in 2 Kings chapter number 4. There's a couple of different stories in this chapter that refer to a victory over death. And so let's look at these two stories today. Elisha was a prophet that was concerned with people and concerned with their needs. He seems to me just to be a little bit different than Elijah. Of course, Elijah was in a different time. He had Ahab and Jezebel breathing down his neck. Elijah seemed a little bit more militant and forceful, whereas Elisha, as we see in various miracles and things that takes place, he was really personal kind of a person and was concerned with people's personal needs and desires in their life. And we have here a story in chapter number 4 of a well-to-do woman, the Bible says. The Bible doesn't talk a lot about well-to-do women, but this woman somehow became well-to-do and seemingly kind of set apart from her husband's wealth. And she comes to her husband and she says, we have this prophet, this man of God that stops by from time to time, and I would just like to make a room for him so that he doesn't have to worry about finding a place to stay, but he always knows that there's a place. And that's a wonderful thing. I can remember as a missionary, I remember a place in Angola, Indiana, the Alt's home. And I always knew that we could call them or stop there. And they even had a guest room and a little registry book there. And my name is in that. And other missionaries and evangelists and people traveling through, their name is in that book because they opened up their home. And my wife and I tell all the missionaries around the state of Indiana, come into our house. Don't worry about getting a hotel. And that's what this lady had done. She didn't really do a small thing. She built a room, it says, with a table and a chair and a bed in it for Elisha. So whenever he was traveling through, he would stop at this lady's home. One day, he tells his servant, Gehazi, he says, I want you to go to the woman and ask her, what she might need. And I love her response. She says, I really don't need anything. Wow, God is looking for people like that really sit back and realize, I really don't need anything. I really don't need a miracle in my life. I challenge you, if you think you need a miracle in your life, write down all the things God has already done for you, all the things you already have, all the blessings that have already taken place in your life. When we begin to do that, we realize we really don't need as many miracles as we think. And this lady was mature enough to understand that. She said, I don't need anything. And when Elisha heard that, he inquired of his servant about her. And he gives this reply. He says this in verse 14. She has no son, and her husband is old. She didn't ask for a son. But the servant just tells Elisha, well, she doesn't have a child, and her husband's old. And Elisha says to, go to her and tell her this time next year, you are going to have a child. And it comes to pass. She has this child, and this child grows. We don't know how old he is at this point in the story. Probably not old enough to go out and work in the fields with his father, but old enough to go out alone and not be accompanied. And one day he walks out to the field and he says, my head, my head. And he gets terribly sick, and he goes in, and he's small enough yet to sit on his mother's lap. And it says in verse number 20, after the servant had lifted him up and carried him to his mother, the boy sat on her lap until noon, and then he died. And she went up, and she laid him on the bed of the man of God, and then she shut the door, and she went out. And she went out to find Elisha. And then as he sees her, he recognizes her coming in the distance. And he says at the end of the 25th verse, look, there's the Shunammite. Run to meet her and ask her, are you all right? Is your husband all right? Is your child all right? Everything is all right, she said. She wanted to wait until she got to the prophet. She wanted to deliver the news herself. She didn't want a servant delivering the news. She said, it's okay. Nothing for him to worry about or be concerned with. And then when she reached the man of God, when she reached Elisha in verse 27, at the mountain, she took hold of his feet, and Gehazi came over to push her away. Remember, the disciples tried to push the children away from Jesus. But the man of God said, "Leave her alone. She is in bitter distress, but the Lord has hidden it from me and has not told me why." And she responds to him, "Did I ask you for a son, my Lord? Didn't I tell you, don't raise my hopes?" So she lets him know, my son's died. I didn't ask for him. My hopes were elevated, and now they've come crashing down at the death of my son. And Elisha is moved with compassion as Jesus would have been moved. And he goes to the home, and he goes up to where the boy is at. And the Bible tells us that he prays. And after he prays, nothing happens. And I'm reminded of the other prophet, Elijah, who prayed 7 times and kept sending his servant, "Do you see any clouds?" And he said, "No, I don't see any clouds." And prayed again and sent him back, and "Do you see any clouds?" "No, I don't see any clouds." Prayed 7 times, and then finally the servant said, "I see a cloud the size of a man's hand." He says, "Tell Ahab to hitch up his chariot, because there's going to be a sound of a heavy rain." Wow. Sometimes we don't get what we want immediately after praying. Elisha, this great man of God who before saw things coming before they ever happened, didn't see this coming. And he goes and he prays, and nothing. The Bible says he stretches himself out upon the boy's body there on his bed. Nothing. It says he walks around the room again. I imagine he's walking around and praying and saying, "God, I don't understand." You know, sometimes even as people of God, we don't understand why things happen the way they do. And I'm sure he was crying out to God, "God, I don't understand why." And he stretches himself out on the boy again. And it says that the boy sneezes 7 times. And he comes back to life. You know, sometimes miracles happen in the way we don't expect them to happen. Sometimes prayer isn't enough. Sometimes we have to get ourselves involved. We have to stretch ourselves out over the situation. And sometimes even after having done that, nothing happens. And we got to pray again, and we got to stretch ourselves out over the situation again until God pulls through and God delivers the miracle that we need. And that's what happened in life. Came back into this child. And he said, "Call the Shunammite woman," in verse number 36. And he did. And when the Shunammite came, he said, "Take your son." And she came in, fell at his feet, and bowed to the ground, and took her son, and went out. Life was restored. Immediately after this, there's death or poison in a pot of stew, and Elisha throws some flour into it, and the stew was made whole. What do you need from God? What is dead in your life? What is poisoning your life? What's destroying your life? God can make a difference. Pray about it. Get yourself involved in it. Pray about it again. Stay involved again. Don't grow weary in well-doing, for at the proper time you will reap a harvest if you do not give up. I hope this study has been a blessing to you today. I hope you're having a great day so far, and may God richly bless the rest of your day.